Hi, good evening. Miss Lewis here, representing the SRC Private Primary, welcoming you to this edition of the Parent Portal podcast. And of course, there's a solo voice on the airwaves today because I am here, no guests, because I really wanted to take some time to share with our listeners about how parents can make study time effective. Now, we know that for many parents, study time is a painful experience. It's a frustrating experience. When the evening comes, we have our fingers crossed. Please don't let them send a bunch of homework. But what I wanted to do is just really take a moment to share with you guys about how you can make study time effective. And, the intention is that by the end of our little piece today, you would have some practical guidelines about how you could move past beyond traditional approaches of rushing through and completing for completion's sake to really engaging an authentic learning experience through homework or revision. Yeah. So even as we talk about effective study time, I want to be able to share with our listeners today about four basic elements: the attention to who is studying, where they're studying, what they're studying, and how parents support that study time. Now, once we start talking about who is studying, what I'm encouraging you to pay attention to is the uniqueness of your child. I know in many instances, as parents, we tend to encourage our kids to study the way that we study and to learn in the ways that work well for us, but we have to remember that each child is unique. And because each child is unique, we have to give attention to that so that the learning, the studying, the practicing, the revision process isn't that painful, like frustrating experience, yeah? And looking at who is studying in a very basic way, we can start looking at what we call learner profiles. And looking at the learner profile means that we want to ask ourselves, how does my child learn best? Who is my child as a learner? What are the ways that information can be presented that would help my child to really grasp this information and understand it in a meaningful way so that it can be applied? Because remember, the goal is we want the student to be able to use the information, yeah? So when we think about the learning profiles, we know that some students are visual, which means that their brains are activated and they respond well when they're given visual prompts, whether it's a picture, through multimedia, any sort of visual stimuli works well for them. Then some of our kids are oral learners or auditory learners, sometimes we call it. And these are the students that learn really well by hearing, because something about listening to a person talk helps them to be able to connect really well and help them to be able to connect better than other ways. Some students are what we call read write learners. They learn, really well when they sit and read and rewrite. So you find these are students who tend to gravitate towards writing over notes. Yeah, some of you may have kids like that, or they would say, Mommy, I have to study, and their version of studying is saying that, okay, I'm going to go in the textbook and I'm going to summarize and I'm going to write down the main points and I'm going to create my bullet points, or I'm going to create study cards and so on. Students who gravitate towards that typically are strong read write learners, and this is fine. And of course, we have our kinesthetic learners, students who do well by doing, physically having what we call concrete learning experience, which means they learn well through hands-on experiences where they have to do something. Now, I'm not here to tell you observe which one they're strongest at and only do that. No, definitely that is not the approach. Because, of course, we want our kids to be well rounded. But what I am encouraging us to be mindful of is to recognize the strong points so we can emphasize and provide experiences that include it, but also recognize the not so strong points so that we could expose our children to other methods that would help them to be a bit more well rounded. But even as parents, when we look at our children and we recognize who is my child as a learner, who is studying, it really helps us to be able to frame a learning experience that is able to appeal to the natural responsiveness of the child so that learning can be an interesting and a positive experience for the student, yeah? Now, we want to pay attention to where they're studying as well. Because as parents, when you start looking at making study time effective, the place for learning is important. So, for instance, we would think the place for learning definitely should not be the bed. Yeah, the place for learning definitely should not be in front of your favorite TV show. But beyond where you should not learn, let's look at the elements of where the learning space or how the learning space should be framed. For instance, your learning space should be clear. It should not be cluttered, whatever the table is or the space or the room. It should be neat, it should be packed, it should be orderly, it should be clear, it should be well lit, giving adequate space for the student to have their books, their stationery, and so on. The level of quiet. How well is the student able to concentrate in the space, in the way that they're using to learn? We want to be mindful of all of this. For some parents, we have study rooms, and that's great. Some of us don't have study rooms. What we have is a desk in the child's bedroom. And for the students for whom that works, that is great. For other students, something as simple as using the dining table and making sure you have a little space on the dining table to sit and have a place to write and to read and to be uninterrupted in the learning and in the doing, and that works as well. But wherever your space is located, whether it's in a private study room, whether it is on the dining table, in the living room, a desk in the bedroom, wherever it is, I'm encouraging us to be mindful to pay attention to where our students are studying. And I'm not saying that it needs to be a rule of thumb that in order to do work, you absolutely must put a chair by a table, but I'm saying that whatever methods that we choose to use and encourage our children in, especially our primary level children, we want to make sure that it is working to produce results. And that is the emphasis. So some children work really well, table to chair, and if that works for them, great, encourage it. There are some children, they're not table to chair persons. And some of you parents are probably nodding right now that your child function best on the floor with their book. And when you leave them to go on the floor, lie down on their stomach and do their notes, they work well. And as long as there is no detriment to it, they're not straining their eyes, getting headaches, or having any sort of negative repercussion, I am saying and suggesting that you can encourage the child to use the place and the space that produces best result. At the end of the day, it's not about the place that we think looks like a best place or best case scenario, but it's about the place and the space that causes the student to have that positive and that productive response to their learning experience, whether it's the homework or the study time. Now, thirdly, we want to think about what are they studying and what are they using for studying or even for homework. And this is where parents, you come in, your check-ins to keep processes accountable. It becomes extraordinarily important, simply because if the student does not have a complete note, how are they going to get homework done? Or if they're missing notes for whatever reason, how they're going to get their study time done. So we want to be mindful that even as we consider creating an effective study experience. As parents, your role in checking in with your children to make sure that they have their complete note from school, it's written in a legible way, the note is coherent, they did not miss anything. All of these factors contribute, making sure they have their textbook or the supplemental resources, paying attention to see whether the teacher would have given some sort of homework that says you need to do online research or you need to get another book. Whatever the case might be, the resource component is important, because what we want to do is make sure that once we have a method and approach to studying that works for the child, we have a physical environment that is conducive to the child. Now we want to make sure that the child has the necessary resources that are needed in order to move forward with their study time or their homework time. And of course, parents can support this by making sure that all of these are effectively combined. So when we think about effective study time, parents be encouraged that the purpose of homework and study is not just to give the child a lot of extra work to do. Ideally, homework is there to be able to give the student the opportunity to review, to check in, to make sure that what was covered within the classroom was understood, to give the student the opportunity to extend understanding, because the homework may require them to apply the learning to some sort of a real world scenario, real life circumstance, a family circumstance, whatever it may be. Know that the original intent behind homework and revision time is to be able to enable learners. And of course, I want to encourage you as a bonus suggestion, stay in touch with your school teacher, your school administration. I know sometimes that a lot of parents feel very overwhelmed because they say, oh, the quantity of homework is too much and so on. But taking time to really foster and build a positive relationship with admin and the teacher will help you get tips from the persons giving the homework to know how to navigate through it, how to work best to support the child to get it done, and if any adjustments or accommodations are maybe needed, it opens the door to be able to make such a request or to be able to have a conversation that makes it the experience such that it helps the teacher's goal to be achieved while executing in a way that works well for the student. So I hope these are points you find it helpful and useful. So even as I close up this bit of a chat on how parents can make study time effective, just a quick reminder that we're looking at who is studying. Pay attention to your child's dominant learning style or preferred learning style and be sure to surround them or give them opportunities to operate in that. Pay attention to where they're studying to make sure that infrastructurally the space, the physical space is accommodating to a good study, homework, or revision time. Pay attention to what they are studying. Make sure they have the relevant content through resources, notes from the school, textbook, or other resources. And know that you, the parent, do have a role, and you are and you can be able to combine all of these effectively to make sure children are well supported to complete their tasks in the home. So we're off to the start. Here we are, just completing the second week of school. Pay attention to the process. Don't take it for granted that it's just the second week and glitches will work themselves out. It does not always happen that way. If you are seeing lapses with your kids in the frequency with which they do their homework or their study time, if you are realizing that your child has not adapted yet and settled in well by the end of the second week, and you're not seeing that independent effort to get homework and study time done, pay attention to it. Have chats about it, whether you chat as a family about what is happening, what needs to happen, give suggestions, help create routines, liaise with your school admin, school teacher, because what you don't want to happen is to reach halfway through the term and realize, oh wow, we're still having the same challenge. So nip it in the bud. We're happy to come with the podcast to be able to share these tips. So we hope that it is definitely useful. Be sure to comment below. Let us know your questions, let us know your thoughts and your experiences. And of course, be sure to call in and continue to message in to let us know what topics you want us to cover as we use the Parent Portal podcast to be able to provide practical guidelines as to how parents can support their children at home. So, of course, signing off now, I'm Mrs. Lewis, Principal at SRC Private Primary. It's been awesome spending time with you guys through the Parent Portal podcast, and we look forward to having you all join us again next week for yet another edition. Have a great one and enjoy the school term.